Part 101. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1016. Subai lowered his head. He looked a little scary now, but he didn't feel much about it. Going around and around, many things, in fact, in the end could only be regarded as do your best and obey fate, much like the old man. Wealth means life and death depend on fate, wealth and honor depend on heaven. Sometimes, Subai also thought about the meaning of what he did. It was as powerful as a blood corpse. In the end, all that was left was a method. But could this method really work? Who knows? Subai had also thought about whether his current lifestyle, no, to be precise, the survival mode, was meaningful. Everything exists for revenge. Even between revenge and his son, he obviously chose the former. Although he was ready to die with his son, this could only be an explanation given by himself. In fact, he still had no choice. Can fulfill the responsibility of a father. But it seems that if I think about it differently, I have now come this far. If I take a step forward, it seems that there is no difference whether it is a cliff or magma. If I were an ordinary person, I might be able to take a step back and choose to go there for the sake of life. Just be content. The smoke smoked my eyes a bit. Subai began to imagine that if he were not an audience, he would live with the little guy. If the little guy could grow up, he could let him go to school, take him on trips, and take him to various famous mountains and rivers. Take a walk and take a look. I can also find him a mother, either Ying or Sunur. If life can be like this, there seems to be no shortcomings. But in fact, this is a paradox. In the past, ordinary people would definitely not be bored enough to adopt a child, and they would also be very disgusted with marrying a woman like Ying who is engaged in such a profession. Even Sunur's family, the huge relationship also made him feel troublesome. It is precisely because of the audience's experience that I can experience something most precious. But it is precisely because of the experience of the audience that those things that are completely accessible to ordinary people are a luxury for them. If you die in one day, you will be rich in heaven. Perhaps. This is the true portrayal of the meaning of one's life. Anyway, if you die early or die later, it's all death. Why not add some trouble to your couple? You created the two of us, and after the experiment and final use, you want to throw them away like garbage. Then I really have to jump around, or at least, I will disgust you. A ray of white light slowly fell down at this time, completely covering Subai. Subai felt a little guilty about Jizhen. In fact, if there was another way, he would never have chosen Jizhen to be the victim. But he is not suitable to do this kind of thing, otherwise the person Fusu wanted to seize his body would be him. In addition, it is impossible to let the monk Buddha or the fat man do this. As for other people, it is very difficult now. Things have become more and more intense, like a needle being sharpened more and more sharply. Broadcasting has also begun to become more and more unscrupulous, gradually deviating from the rules it originally followed. Except for Xie, who is a free person and cannot be defined as an audience, other people, maybe when Fusu wants to come out of Xie's body and enter someone else's body, that person will be broadcast in the first 0.001 seconds. Pull into the story world. Broadcasting was originally about face, and its face was its rules, but since Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiu integrated into the broadcast has become more and more shameless. Subai didn't know what impact this shamelessness would have on broadcasting. It was like when a regime began to act recklessly regardless of its own laws, its rule and existence would begin to waver. Subai slowly raised his head, revealing a mottled and broken face. "Hey, what about you, shameless thing?" Next moment, the white light disappears. Subai also disappeared. Dear listeners, welcome to the horror radio show. I am the host. I don't have a name because names have no meaning here. Everyone's destiny is constant. The slogan that one thinks one's destiny is up to one's own will is often just an insincere perfunctory. Just as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, just as the tide rises and falls, eternal laws create eternal laws. For people who seem to change their destiny, is it because their destiny itself is like this? A person can easily jump across a line, but cannot get out of a face at all. Destiny is so beautiful, so cold that it makes people feel distressed, and it is enough to trigger countless reveries in people. For those who do not follow fate, fate is still generous. It will give you a chance to prove yourself. Even if the final outcome is already determined, it will not give up admiring those who try to challenge fate and cry in despair. Tears. The sound of the radio kept echoing in Sudbai's ears. But Sudbai was enjoying the pleasure of his body being repaired. When entering and exiting the story world, the body will be repaired, which is a benefit for the audience. Therefore, many audience members can be more unscrupulous when exploring mysteries or completing tasks in the real world. The mottled and broken body began to slowly heal, and Sudbai felt that his body was being filled with vitality again, but the impulse and feeling of that state had long since disappeared, which was unexpected by Sudbai. After his body was completely repaired, Sudbai opened his eyes and looked forward. In front of him was a road with tombstones on both sides of the road. Broadcasting seems to have a special liking for things like tombstones, the tombstones under the underworld of the place of enlightenment, and right now, there are tombstones on both sides of this road called destiny. When Sudbai actually walked in, he finally discovered the meaning of this road. At the beginning, there were still some names that looked like ancient people, because there were some Chinese characters on the names. Of course, these were Eastern names, and later there were Western names. Some of their life stories are also engraved on the tombstones, of course, their defiance of fate and their ultimate failure. In other words, resisting fate is, to a certain extent, resisting broadcasting. When the road was almost over, Sudbai saw Lan Lin's tombstone. Looking at the way of cause and effect, is broadcasting also a provocation and resistance to itself? Therefore, Lan Lin's tombstone will also be here. So, what exactly is cause and effect? If broadcasting is regarded as a huge data network, is causality a key to hacking into its interior? Sudbai didn't understand cause and effect, so he didn't know the specific answer. But even if he did, no one seemed to have really understood anything. However, there was one person who Sudbai felt might have succeeded. At least, he was the one closest to success. If Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiao are the two people who have gone the furthest on that road, then Lao Fugui is probably the person who has the most thorough understanding of cause and effect. Going further, Sudbai saw the tombstone of the bloody corpse. After stopping for a while in front of the bloody corpse's tombstone, Sudbai started to move forward again. Ahead was boundless darkness, and Sudbai walked into the darkness. He knew that the story world this time was inherently punitive. Coupled with the general policy influence of the audience's destruction plan and Su Yuhang's deep fatherly love for him. Estimate for yourself. I really have to die here. There is not much sadness, nor too many regrets. Dark is slowly fading away. When everything around you suddenly became clear, Sudbai found himself standing in the center of a Roman dueling arena. There was an empty flat land around him, and surrounding the flat ground were layers of stands. There are two thrones placed in the two most prestigious positions due east. That's where the king and queen should be. For some reason, Sudbai felt that that should be the position of Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiao, but they couldn't just appear like this, but those two chairs should have shown some meaning to them. This is a fateful trial. It is also the judgment of parents on their children. The entire duel field was empty except for Sudbai. Sudbai was curious about what was waiting for him in this story world. The blood corpse was originally pulled into the story world and was directly suppressed in the end. Sudbai had not yet attained enlightenment, so it was impossible to compete with the blood corpse. Therefore, if Broadcast really wanted to kill himself, it should not be difficult. Looking around, Subai felt like a visitor, but what he was visiting was probably his burial place. Crack, click. An iron fence in front of the flat land slowly rose at this time. Buzz. 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 Heavy footsteps came from inside. Subai raised his head slightly, his expression remained the same. A man wearing broken armor appeared. His eyes were empty and he must have been blind. His body was also broken, but he still stood here fighting. Dressed in military uniform, with a clanging iron horse. Subai didn't know where this opponent was cloned from, because Subai only cared about the existence in front of him and what state he was in. Roar. The man raised the iron sword full of gaps in his hand and roared. The sound was overwhelming, with a sense of determination and desolation, as if he was standing on a battlefield strewn with Pauzi's corpses under the setting sun. The despair and sadness were so rich that they almost turned into water drops. But Subai smiled at this moment. He laughed loudly. He also smiled very exaggeratedly. Because the man in front of him was Subai's opponent. Not a big boss. It is the pinnacle level of high-end listeners. He's not a big boss. Sure enough, he's not a big boss. Subai turned his head and looked at the two juxtaposed thrones on the high platform in the distance with a sarcastic expression. Are you too scared? I'm afraid I'll really kill the boss's most capable son here. What if the plan over there succeeds? Don't you have anyone available? For the first time in my life. Subai really felt a little bit. Father as a mountain. Mother's love is like the ocean. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 1017. One is the immortal flower of Lang Yuan, and the other is the immaculate jade. If there is no chance of romance, I will meet him again in this life. If there is a romance, how can the mind end up emptying out? One is complaining in vain, the other is worrying in vain. The open-air KTV was a very simple facility compared to later generations. There was a lot of noise in the surround sound system. In front of it, a barbecue grill was erected. Su Fuegui is roasting sheep. He is not particularly good at cooking. Roasting whole sheep seems to be the only thing he can do well. The fat of the mutton kept dripping out, making a sizzling sound, and the aroma of mutton gradually began to permeate the air. Sitting next to Su Fuegui was a woman. The woman was dressed in a cheongsam. She was extremely elegant. She did not wear makeup, but she was pretty and charming. Every move she made carried an aura of youth and charm. Su Fuegui thinks she is very good looking. Of course, this good-lookingness only comes from the perspective of a man's pure appreciation of women, because this woman is the target of his good friend, and Su Fuegui himself has a wife, and even his children are already in elementary school. The song Wu Ning Mei is sung melodiously, without too many gorgeous singing skills, but the singing has the kind of endless thoughts in a dream of red mansions. For most people, this song is a talkative song. It may not sound very good, but the key lies in whether the singer can integrate into that emotion and whether he can add his own perception of dream of red mansions to it. Obviously, this is not a problem for Su Yuhang. There is no doubt about this man's skills in this area. At this time, he was singing and making secret glances at Lu Menjiao, who was sitting over there. Su Fuegui picked up the knife and scratched the mutton back and forth, sighing in his heart that it was a restless night. His old friend, who was originally so suave and wanted to take a paper fan and vomit blood on it at any time, almost turned into a courting a gorilla in heat. Love can make people blind, especially in this environment and background of identity. Perhaps this is what Su Yuhang is pursuing. What he wants is not only love, but also belongs to the literati. That kind of literary youth. At the end of the song, Su Fuegui was roasting the sheep, but Lu Menjiao remained motionless. No one applauded or cheered, which was a bit embarrassing. But Su Yuhang was still very narcissistic, applauded himself, and then walked down. Fuegui, is the mutton roasted? It's almost ready, ready to eat. Su Yuhang cut a piece of meat himself, put it on a plate and handed it to Lu Menjiao. Menjiao, this is the tenderest and most delicious part of the lamb. Try it quickly. Fuegui can't cook other dishes, but this roasted whole lamb is what I have to admire. Lu Menjiao nodded, took the plate, opened her red lips lightly, and chewed slowly. A woman who can act very charming when eating is almost equal to the level of beauty and disaster. Su Fuegui just smiled and continued cutting the mutton. In the air. It is filled with the scent of estrus and cumin, which is a bit choking. Su Yuhang leaned in front of Lu Menjiao like a little boy to ask for help, but Lu Menjiao remained unmoved. Su Fuegui felt that he couldn't stand it anymore. He felt that he should do something to purify the atmosphere. He put down his plate. Picked up the microphone. I chose a song. A few moments. Su Yuhang, who was chatting with Lu Menjiao about painting, was stunned. The sonorous and passionate rhythm of March of the Volunteers washed away all his preparation and efforts tonight into an exaggerated bubble. After the simple gathering ended, Lu Menjiao left. She remained indifferent from the beginning to the end. Even in the face of Su Yuhang's almost unabashed pursuit, she remained indifferent. Su Yuhang and Su Fuegui each held a bottle of coke in their hands, drinking and walking along the street. Su Yuhang kept talking about how good Lu Menjiao was and how he felt. Su Fuegui was listening next to him, nodding from time to time. A long time. Su Yuhang calmed down. Su Fuegui has always been quiet. As they continued walking, Su Yuhang suddenly stopped, pointed to an apartment across the street and said, I'll take you to meet someone. Who are you meeting? Su Fuegui asked. One person. Ordinary people. A scientist. Su Fuegui still nodded. When he was with this old friend, the most he seemed to do was nod. Pushing open the railing and walking in, the other party lived on the first floor, but Su Fuegui noticed that this was probably just a temporary place for the other party to stay, or more like an inn. The door is unlocked, open the door and go straight in. Beethoven's Symphony of Destiny was playing in the room, and an old butler was making coffee, as if he had guessed the time of the guest's arrival. A young man was sitting on a wicker chair, holding a book in his hand and reading. He was so fascinated that he didn't seem to even notice the guests coming in. Master, the guests have arrived, the old butler said as he brought the coffee. Oh. The young man closed the book without any apology for neglecting the guests. He still went his own way. Su Fuegui noticed that Su Yuhang sat directly on the sofa and picked up the coffee as if he was familiar with this young man. Su Fuegui also I noticed that what the young man was holding was a novel about a secret room murder case, which was recently published by a British detective novelist. The other person was reading the original English version. After all, it had not been translated in China. Please take a seat. The young man said to Su Fuegui. Su Fuegui nodded and sat down. Everyone picked up their own coffee. The young man drank it leisurely. Su Yuhang was also drinking it, but Su Fuegui suddenly felt a little unappetite. This cup of coffee was a little too greasy, reminding him of the fat that came out of the lamb when he had just roasted it. At the same time, it also reminded him of the special environment in which a bunch of listeners were killed together in a story world. The corpse oil slowly flowed out from under it. I heard Su Yuhang mentioned you often, Su Fuegui. I'm glad to meet you here. The young man started talking, but he still held the coffee and had no intention of getting up and being polite. Su Fuegui put down his coffee and rubbed his hands on his legs unnaturally, looking a little embarrassed. Do you need some sugar? The young master asked. Su Fuegui shook his head. Even if he put a roomful of sugar in this cup of coffee, he couldn't cover up the taste. His surname is Zhao Suyuhang introduced, a civilian scientist with his own laboratory. He made me the potion I used in the story world last time. Su Fuegui nodded again. Have you eaten yet? Mr. Zhao asked. I've eaten, Su Fuegui. No, Suyuhang. Su Fuegui and Suyuhang looked at each other. Haha, Mr. Zhao directly ordered his butler to prepare, and then said to Su Fuegui, my friend, if you have the chance, I will invite you to visit my laboratory. I'm just a rough guy. Even after returning to the city, I've been doing administrative work. I really don't know much about science, Su Fuegui refused in disguise. My laboratory does not invite ordinary people in. Fuegui, although this is our first official meeting, I am very curious about you. I really hope you can give me a chance to satisfy me such curiosity. You know, curiosity can kill the cat. Sorry, Su Fuegui refused again. Suyuhang was sitting next to him, still drinking his coffee. Su Fuegui's attitude made him slightly dissatisfied, but at this time, he couldn't say anything. It was a cold guest-host interaction. Su Fuegui stood up and left before the steak was served. Suyuhang, who wanted to stay and eat some more, could only get up and leave with Su Fuegui. Dark streets. Dim street lights. The two figures walking side by side lengthened. And it started to get longer and longer. Suyuhang stretched, looked at Su Fuegui, who was in a low mood, smiled, and said, "What's wrong? Do you blame me for wasting your time?" "My time is not precious." Su Fuegui shook his head and said melancholy, "How long have you known him?" "It's been almost half a year," Suyuhang calculated. "I provided him with some research materials, and he fed back to me the research results." Su Fuegui nodded again and stopped talking. Suyuhang stopped, and Su Fuegui took a few more steps forward before realizing that he also stopped. Suyuhang put his hand on Su Fuegui's shoulder and said seriously, "I have always regarded you as my best friend." "Me too," Su Fuegui said. "So, if I have any good things, I hope to share them with you. You know, walking alone at night always makes you feel lonely, so I hope you can accompany me. At least, apart from you, I can't find anyone else in this world who would walk that road with me." Suyuhang said it very sincerely. Su Fuegui raised his head sadly, as if hesitating or thinking, and finally said helplessly, "Haha, I can't leave. You know, I'm afraid of the dark." Hearing this, a look of loneliness appeared on Suyuhang's face. This man who had always been high-spirited rarely showed such a low mood. "Then will we remain good friends in the future?" "Yes, didn't I say before that when you catch Lu Menjiao and give birth to a child, I will be his godfather?" "Mr. Zhao is actually very optimistic about you." Suyuhang pursed his lips. This was the best hint he could give. Life and death are determined by fate and wealth. Didn't the first emperor and Alexander also collapse? Then, what can't collapse? Su Fuegui squatted down on the ground and poked the ground of the asphalt road with his finger. "Nothing will fall apart. For a banquet, there is no tall building that will not collapse. There is one more thing Su Fuegui didn't say. There is no eternal friendship. This plot will be written using a combination of flashbacks and normal narration. In the end, it will be merged into one. By the way, it can also be regarded as filling a hole for Lao Fuegui and Suyuhang. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1018. Everyone needs to surrender. When you choose not to surrender this time, you suddenly find that soon, you have to continue to surrender in order not to surrender anymore. For example, in the car now, whether it is the monk or Fusu, two people, they don't seem to be in a very high mood. No one knows what Xie Zhen's final choice is, maybe not even Ji Zhen himself. Moreover, even if Xie Zhen suddenly says he is willing to do so, will he change his mind when he finally dedicates himself? Neither knows. This time, the monk completely got on Subai's chariot. If Subai had already stopped hitting the south wall and never looked back, then he, the monk, actually had no way out. Therefore, at this time, what is needed is absolute insurance. No matter what decision Xie Zhen will make in the end, the monk is unwilling to take the risk. Moreover, Fusu is also unwilling to take the risk. This eldest son is burdened with the hatred of the country and the family. He is the one who can afford to lose the most people. Therefore, the two people actually reached a consensus in an instant without any prior contact or communication. "There are people in front of you," the monk said. "You get out of the car and I'll stop them. Once we get to that location, we should be safe." "Is that woman reliable?" Fusu asked. He was asking Chen Ryu. "She may not be willing to get involved in this matter, but she probably won't take action against you." The monk can only promise so much. He is not Subai, and there is no way for Chen Ryu to promise anything to him. Fusu responded and disappeared in the car. Then, the monk drove the car into the service area in front. As soon as the car stopped, a man and a woman came over. The woman was very tall, and the man seemed shorter. These two people knew each other, one was Su Rongrong and the other was Qian Shubin. They were considered high-level listeners in Sichuan and had crossed paths before. The monk got out of the car, smiled, put his hands together and said Umitba. "Isn't he here?" Su Rongrong asked helplessly. "Kilv, you have made it difficult for me. What's so hard to do? Qi Lu is determined to fight with us." "Forget it, we won't finish the fight. We just sit here and think about it. I owe someone a favor, so I have to help him do it. This matter." After saying that, Qian Shubin sat cross-legged and looked at Qi Lu. Su Rongrong leaned against the car, took out her mobile phone, and started playing a game. The monk opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something, but finally hesitated, said nothing, and sat cross-legged. Everyone has a steelyard in their heart, and everyone has their own weighing. These two people wanted to participate in this matter, but their interest was actually not high. There were less than 10 high-level listeners in Shijiazhuang who actually took action, and there were 10 others who seemed to be watching the fun. If the group of outsiders who were watching the excitement had chosen to join in from the beginning, Xie Zhen would not have been able to survive when Subai and himself arrived. Similarly, if those people had directly attacked him and others, no matter what Subai did, domineering can't scare those people like Zhang Fei scared off Cao's army at Changbanpo. In the final analysis, some people will be particularly tempted by the so-called immigration qualifications, but some people are actually still waiting and hesitating. "Can it be successful?" Qian Shubin asked. He seemed to be very concerned about this matter, but he didn't really show it in his behavior. He and Su Rongrong treated the monk to Zier here, which can be regarded as a mutual concern for both sides. There is an explanation. In other words, he actually has no position of his own. "It's difficult," the monk said truthfully. "Haha, let me tell you, it would be more practical to kill that person to obtain immigration qualifications. Otherwise, if we don't have time to achieve enlightenment, we will really have no choice but to die. And even if the enlightenment succeeds, there is probably no hope." Su Rongrong complained while playing with her mobile phone, seemingly dissatisfied with Qian Shubin's choice. Of course, now that Qian Shubin had decided to be passive, Su Rongrong didn't have the capital to be active even if she wanted to. At least, this woman knew in her heart that if the monk wanted to deal with her, her chances of winning in a one-on-one fight should be very low, because she was a spiritual strengthener, and the monk's state of mind and inheritance were just restrained for her. There are only 3 qualifications. After killing and snatching, "Are you sure that you can get that qualification?" Qian Shubin said with some disapproval. "On the contrary, If their thing succeeds, then the broadcast will naturally stop the destruction of listeners. Plan, then everyone actually still has something to live for. But everyone thinks they are the protagonist, the monk said, everyone thinks they can win one of the positions. Qian Shuban shook his head helplessly, but if you don't regard yourself as the protagonist, generally supporting characters will die relatively early. In the service area, everyone was in peace and quiet. In the small temple outside the orphanage, the fat man continued to stay in the wine jar, swaying from time to time, and occasionally snoring. People need to rest, just like machines also need maintenance. Fatty has not rested for a long time. Because of his selfish desires, his Taoist heart has long been unstable. Taking this opportunity, Fatty also plans to clean himself up. People in the circle of friends often say that going to Tibet can purify the soul, but this is nothing more than petty bourgeoisie's idle moaning. Although Fatty doesn't really like this way of purifying the soul, it is undeniable that Chen Ru's method is indeed effective. Born to die, born to be a little bit, and to die is just a small box. For the audience, it is lucky to be able to hold a small urn after death. How many people died in an unknown manner without even the whole body, and died in a muddle? Relatives and friends in real life will mourn you in a confused way. Buddha continued to meditate in the side room while wisps of green smoke kept rising from his body. For Buddha, his first priority now is to consolidate his realm and eliminate the hidden dangers of forcibly improving his realm in battle. In addition to the fat man and Buddha, there are two women in the small temple. At this time, Sunar was sitting on a stone, and Chen Ru was standing next to him. Although Chen Ru doesn't look like a woman most of the time, it has to be said that compared to Buddha and Fatty, it seems that only Sunar can say a few words to her in this place. You like him? Chen Ru asked. I can tell. I don't know, but I probably liked it very much before. Now, it doesn't matter whether I like it or not. I took this photo when I went to have a barbecue. Chu Zhao was gone, and she was still alive for the time being. She couldn't get involved in what Subai was doing, she could only watch. The so-called little friends in the past had now become the most embarrassing relationship. He is an overly selfish person, Chen Ru said, and then she looked at the orphanage on the hill opposite. He is looking for a son, and his purpose is nothing more than to find a light in his dark life. It's just sustenance. Kind-hearted utilization is called utilization, and unkind utilization is also called utilization. In this regard, there is actually no essential difference between him and his father. I don't agree with what you said. Sunar pursed her lips. Talking to Chen Ru was undoubtedly a very stressful thing for her. Without Subai, the little guy would just be a spiritual child in the story world. Without the little one, Subai might become more pure and unrestrained. The bond between them is mutual. One is willing to fight and the other is willing to suffer. It is just a matter of mutual consent. You have never been exposed to this little guy. I have always felt that his intelligence is no worse than that of any adult. Then I really want to take a look, but it's a pity that he didn't let me try to see if I can rescue his son. After Chen Ru finished speaking, her eyes narrowed slightly, and there were a few figures standing vaguely on the mountains in the distance. Because of her presence, those figures only dared to watch from a distance and did not dare to get close. In the small temple, Buddha and Fatty were also the ones who sensed all this. The fat man woke up from his snoring and twisted his body to get out of the wine jar and board the pirate ship. It would be pointless to disembark immediately. The two of them didn't need to write anything at this time. After all, it is they who make the choice. However, when the fat man just came out of the wine jar, a ray of white light fell on him. Dear listeners. A wry smile appeared on the fat man's face, and he reluctantly took out a cigarette and bit it in his mouth. If the broadcast about the bloody corpse wife was just out of pure fun, then this time, it's not as simple as fun anymore. It was done so obviously, so deliberately. The more explained. The radio is scary. Since you are afraid, it means that we have a chance, not that we have become stronger. Sensing the few auras approaching here in the distance, the audience was not united, far less than the unified Qin Empire in the past, but the Qin dynasty was still destroyed. What changed was not the Qin dynasty or the audience, but because the broadcasting changed and became weaker. Alexander and the first emperor chose the weakest node of the broadcasting and prepared to have a real decisive battle at this time. The Buddha also woke up from his trance, and a white light enveloped him at this moment. Buddha was a little surprised, but also a little relieved. He stood up and looked at the fat man who was also shrouded in white light under the Sanking statue opposite. The two looked at each other and smiled. Next moment, the white light disappears. Two people also disappeared. To the southeast, the breath of Fusu is getting closer. And those figures seem to be making some preparations. Chen Ryu stood there motionless. Buddha and Fatty had been pulled into the story world. Now, the broadcast is actually looking at her attitude. Once she makes the slightest move, then Boss Liang will no longer be alone. Chen Ryu looked at the 3 wine jars in the small temple that sealed the 3 high-level powerful men from the west. Frowning slightly. No matter how you look at it, there seems to be no hope of winning. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1019. Radio has its own period of weakness. It is the most powerful and most desperate existence in most of the time. When it is ready, it begins to borrow the resources of the world to continuously cultivate its own audience to attack. When conquering another world, it was in the most invincible state. The Macedonian Empire and the Qin dynasty, which were as powerful as those of the past, were finally wiped out in front of the broadcasts of that period. At present, we are in the stage of broadcasting relocation. This is a period when all threats before and behind us have been completely eliminated, but because of a cooperation between Alexander and the first emperor 2000 years ago, there are hidden dangers for success. But it's like a remote-controlled bomb. If the signal cannot be sent out, then the bomb is actually no different from a stone. Once broadcasting solves the problem of this world and moves into the next world, even if the 500 evil stars awaken again due to an accident, it will be difficult to shake broadcasting's existence, because broadcasting can use the indigenous people of that world to cultivate them. Sometimes, its cannon fodder appears in batches to help it solve any problems. But even now, broadcasters are the operators of the game, and listeners are players in the game. If they want to defeat the broadcasters in the game, as Chen Ryu just lamented, it seems that there is really no hope of winning. It has been a month since the last group war. The last line of defense organized by this world has been completely defeated. Of course, it is not so much the last line of defense as it is that there are still some strong people in this world. The last carnival, the bloody carnival. Lychee stood alone by the stream, her hair wet. It was obvious that she had just taken a bath. This world no longer has any power to form an organized organization, and the remaining few scurrying fish will probably only take another half a year to be completely cleaned up. This feeling is just like when the US military invaded Iraq. The organized army of Iraq basically collapsed under the rapid and fierce offensive of the US military. It either surrendered quickly or was directly defeated. In fact, the energy and time the US military spent on post-war cleanup far greater than what was consumed when fighting the regular Iraqi army. Lychee remembered that in the last war, the opponent did not even have an adult dragon. Only 3 lizard dragons appeared, and there were only 7 boss-level natives left, and they all died in that war. The remaining most of the next batch were also strangled. The listeners are invaders. They enter here based on the will of the broadcast. However, there is no question whether the local indigenous people can become puppet soldiers or lead the party. Broadcasting needs to clean up all possible threatening existences in this world. At least, existences above the level of advanced listeners cannot be left. As for other creatures, If they are wiser and choose to hide themselves, then the broadcaster may turn a blind eye, just as there are many secret realms and some hidden monsters in his original world. Same. They may be the last little fish that were hidden when broadcasting conquered the world. The little fish that had lost their spirit of resistance and fighting spirit were left behind by broadcasting as a supplement to life. The posture and rules of broadcasting have deprived the conquered world of at least the existence of top combat power, other than resistance. Broadcasting has no mercy, let alone appeasement. What it has lost is just batches of cannon fodder. The cost is really not big. Lychee sat down next to the big tree. In the distance, there was a group of traveling merchants, and the woodcutter could be seen on the hillside further away. Yes, there are humans in this world, but they are taller than the humans in their own world. Taller, an adult male should be more than 2 meters tall, and a random child would be 1.8 meters tall at the age of 10. However, Li Ji felt that when they exterminate a series of powerful ethnic groups such as the giants and dragons in this world, the human population in this world will expand rapidly, and their height may also be reduced as a result. After all, there are no real natural enemies anymore. This world is very big, much larger than the Earth. And unlike the Earth, the proportion of the continental area of this world is larger than that of the Earth. In other words, the number of species in this world will be many times that of the Earth. Originally, this world was civilized. The civilization built from top to bottom by relying on peak strength was intricate and could be called unique. However, due to the invasion of broadcasts from generation to generation, the upper structure of this world collapsed, which directly affected the original trajectory of the middle and lower levels of this world. Wars, plagues, mutations, and other things began to happen non-stop. It was a messy endgame. Some civilizations were annihilated, while others continued to survive. Lychee had seen tribes living in groups similar to savages, and an empire structure similar to a feudal dynasty. At the same time, he had also seen the existence of a political system similar to the Roman Empire in the past. A great man once said that what changes the world's structure is actually the change of productivity, but in Lychee's view, it is nothing more than a sign of the transition from civilization to technological civilization. One hand is constantly stirring up this change in the hope of slowly changing the civilizational attributes of the world. Of course, Lychee would not study this kind of thing. She was not interested in it. After taking a bath, she started to wander casually. When Haimai died, she lost her connection with that world, which made Lizzie feel uncomfortable. She was a strong woman who liked to control everything in her own hands. At the same time, she was also a woman who holds a grudge. It's a pity that the younger brother who had the same problem as him was a little unclear about the hatred in his heart, but Li Ji believed that at this time, he had a chance. Now, it's just a matter of waiting for the broadcast to move here. And the opportunity she wants will appear then. Whether she can succeed or not, Lizzie doesn't want to worry about it. She just wants revenge. Perhaps, from this point of view, she is very similar to Subai. Ahead, a village appeared. The population of this village was much larger than that of the ordinary village. There were probably nearly 10,000 people. In fact, it could be regarded as a small city, but the people here were relatively ignorant. Their predecessors, they were originally slaves of a certain big country, but then that country collapsed. They had freedom in disguise, but they were still accustomed to the life of former slaves. Everyone lived in Datongbu together, ate and clothed together, and ethics and morals were not important to them. Didn't get any reflection. They are not barbaric, but at the same time they have nothing to do with civilization. They are equal to the outcasts of this era. They do not have the courage to take control of their own lives, do not know how to build or create, and they do not know what progress is. Waiting for another army to pass by and take over their lives, they seem more accustomed to their days as slaves. For some people, If you ask them to think and learn to be their own masters, it may be a kind of torture for them. The bizarre social structure and the incredible chaotic order are constantly evolving and developing. The listeners are gods, especially after the top power in this world is destroyed. To most ordinary people in this world, they are gods, out and out gods. Therefore, they will also look at these ordinary people with the eyes of gods. Lychee walks among them. They are either numb in expression, walking like a zombie, or making peace in chaos. Who is whose child and who is whose father have lost all meaning of existence here. They are dull, they are ignorant, they are dirty, and at the same time, they are also lazy and undisciplined. Lychee felt that they were like a group of donkeys in human skins. If no one whipped them, they would not know what to do. Fortunately, food is not difficult to find in this world, and anyone with hands and feet will not starve to death. As he walked, Lizzie suddenly felt that these people seemed a bit similar to himself and the audience. Everyone is a being with only skin and no soul. It is difficult for you to find the meaning of your life, and you cannot discern what the road ahead of you is. Perhaps, the audience is just a paving stone on the way forward one after another. You only need to lie down where you should lie. Thought. Mood. Need it? As Lychee walked, she saw a crowded place in front of her. There were about 1,000 people gathered together to kneel down and shout. Although Lychee couldn't understand their language, she could probably feel that a sacrifice was being carried out. Ceremony. Most of the origins of human civilization come from the worship of totems and gods. This is considered the most primitive form. Lychee has seen this a lot. As for the people who are currently worshipping, there is a look in their eyes that the people outside do not have, that kind of fanaticism, that kind of belief, that kind of excitement. Belief. Let them gradually begin to break away from the essence of slavery. Although being a human slave and a god slave sound no different, the latter is obviously more advanced than the former. When Lychee looked at the center, she was slightly distracted. There is a stone sculpture in the center. The stone sculpture depicts a woman stepping on a dragon. This is a statue of a god, although the production is a bit rough, but it can still be clearly distinguished. The woman these people worship is the woman who killed the dragon. The reason why Lychee was absent-minded was also because this woman was herself. 10 days ago, she killed a lizard demon dragon that escaped from the battlefield near this mountain range. If nothing else, this scene should have been witnessed by many people here, and then they sculpted the stone statue. In other words, he is the god in their eyes. What they are worshipping. In fact, it is myself. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1020. Clang. The general came forward with his sword, extremely swift and fierce, with a terrifying fierceness. Subai had been going around in circles without having to direct contact with the other party. Since broadcasting chose such an opponent as the first opponent in his punishing story world, he was obviously hesitant, or in other words, broadcasting was actually waiting. Although he didn't know why, at least Subai knew that the broadcaster was a little nervous and uneasy like himself. There was no need to know the reason, because the reason might not be with him at all. Therefore, Subai also made a favor, since the broadcaster wanted to wait to see the final result of the situation, he would delay a little longer and wait slowly together. It's just that this opponent seems to be missing a muscle and keeps launching attacks against him. He can't take it too seriously. If he beats this guy to death and forces the broadcaster to show a second, more powerful opponent, then it's really not necessary. Because of this, Subai gradually developed some injuries, but Subai didn't pay too much attention to it. The figure retreated again, and the opponent's attack was dodged by him again. Subai reached out and gently touched the wound on his arm. The wound healed quickly, leaving no trace. The general in front of him rushed over again. He was just a puppet, a tireless puppet. There was no audience in the empty stands around, but it also created a depressing atmosphere. The battle seemed a bit boring, and luckily there were no spectators around, otherwise they would have booed Sudbai's fighting style of wandering around without attacking. Buzz. The general's sword stabbed diagonally again. This time, Sudbai did not completely retreat but took a step sideways. Pressing down with one hand, he directly grabbed the opponent's iron sword. Then he rushed forward and hit his shoulder hard. On the other party, the general was knocked out, and his iron sword fell into Sudbai's hand. Sudbai danced several sword flowers with the iron sword and looked at him coldly. Sure enough, the general rushed over again. He had no reason, no sanity, no fear, and no feeling. He was like a single program that executed orders and only knew what to do. Sudbai thought of the body skills that Hills had demonstrated in front of him in the place of enlightenment. He held his sword back and forth to block the opponent's fist attacks, and then relied on his own strength to strike back at the right time. The general once he was whipped out by Sudbai for the first time, and then he quickly got up again and charged again. This made Sudbai feel a little tired and bored, but he still suppressed his urge to kill this guy with one sword. Sudbai was not afraid of death, but wanted to make his death more valuable. His second brother Zheng told himself that he missed his parents underground, so Sudbai was happy to take Su Yuhang and his wife to the underground for a family reunion. The general is still persevering, but although he is very strong, compared with the body of a boss like Sudbai who is almost a bug, he obviously does not pose much of a threat, and his injuries are also being dealt with by Sudbai again and again. Began to slowly decline. Just when Sudbai began to feel a little tired from this perseverance duel, figures suddenly appeared in the originally empty stands around him. Originally, Sudbai thought the broadcast was boring, so he set up some audience backgrounds to liven up the atmosphere, but soon, Sudbai discovered that there was something special about these audiences. Those with missing arms and legs, or even heads, were standing there wearing worn-out armors and holding broken weapons, and their number was constantly increasing. Soon, except for the two at the highest position of the main stand, except for the throne that was still empty, the rest of the seats in the stands had been filled, and Sudbai also roughly guessed their identities from some people whose armors and even hair buns were relatively well preserved. These onlookers are all Qin soldiers. Then, the person he is fighting with now should be a Qin general. Sudbai didn't know what the purpose of broadcasting's trick was it just to disgust himself? It seems that it is really not disgusting. Even if he knows that the person in front of him is the Qin general, even if he knows that the densely packed stands around him are all Qin soldiers who died in fighting against the broadcast. For him, Sudbai, it is really, no impact at all. He didn't feel guilty, nor did he feel any debt at all. Of course, Sudbai still had some admiration for the Qin soldiers of that generation, but admiration couldn't be eaten. General Qin lowered his hands and bent his body slightly. In the battle with Sudbai just now, he exhausted all his energy. However, Sudbai never had a serious counterattack, so he was not dead yet. Although his injuries were more serious, he was still capable of fighting. Sudbai looked at him, and his eyes looked at Sudbai through the hanging bun. The two people's eyes met, without any sparks. He was a clone, Sudbai knew very well in his heart. Although the broadcast clone had a thinking mode that was not inferior to that of the main body, Sudbai had seen clones of his own monk, Fat Man, Bloody Corpse, etc. before, and they were actually the same as those of the main body. There is no difference between me and the one in front of me, but the one in front of me is obviously special, including the Qin soldiers in the stands around me. They died in the final madness more than 2,000 years ago, and what was cloned by the broadcast was their spiritual will and physical body at the moment of their death. They do not have the ability to think. To be precise, they are actually a group of lunatics who fell into a state of final hysteria. General Qin adjusted his body and then rushed over again. This time, his speed was nearly twice as slow as at the beginning. Subai stood still, and when he came over, he turned around and knocked him over. He fell to the ground, and then the iron sword was pierced by Subai into the left side of the opponent's abdomen, nailing him completely to the arena. General Qin grabbed the hilt of the sword with both hands and tried desperately to pull it out. He wanted to continue fighting, but the iron sword had Subai's strength instilled in it. General Qin, who had not much strength left, could only it's just a useless struggle. After all, Subai is not a fat man or a monk. They can completely create a formation to trap this guy, but Subai will have to squeeze him to exhaustion before he can settle this guy down. Now is not the time to kill him. This is a punitive story world, but the broadcast obviously does not intend to kill him directly, which gives Subai a lot of room for imagination. He wants to live, not for himself, nor for the little guy. He wants to live to see Subai. The day the Yuhangs fell off their broadcasting chairs. Jeju, Lao Qin, fight against the national calamity together. There will be no truce until the blood is shed dry. The great Qin war song began to be heard from the surrounding stands. Once upon a time, countless Qin soldiers sang this war song to face groups of audiences. But now, this war song is sounded again, but it is full of ironic sadness. They were already dead, but they were cloned by the radio and used as entertainment toys. For the first time, Subai felt disgusted with the so-called fun of the radio. Jeju and Lao Qin, go together. General Qin, who was pinned by Subai with the end of his sword, raised his head and hit the end of the sword as if he couldn't bear the humiliation. Puff. There was a sound of flesh and blood being cut apart. The Qin general's head flew away from his body. He died. His death surprised Subai. Originally, Subai didn't mean to humiliate him at all, but Subai's behavior and the fact that he was whipped away by Subai again and again made his mind go into knots. Scholars can be killed but not humiliated. This made Subai feel helpless and didn't know what to say. At that moment, the general's body began to evaporate slowly, and the iron sword also began to disintegrate. The fence that had fallen down over there slowly rose up again at this time, and the fence on the west side that had not moved before was also raised at this time. Is it 2 against 1? Subai thought to himself. Main Mission 1, kill the other 2 duelists. Main Mission 2 will be released after Main Mission 1 is completed. Subai received such a task. At the same time, a person walked out from the shadows behind the other 2 fences. A person was huge and had a lot of fat. He looked like a mountain of meat. The other has a muscular build, similar to that of a bodybuilder. When they walked out of the shadows, Subai suddenly realized. Right. This is in line with the idea of broadcasting fun. So, isn't it going to wait any longer? Or have you already determined the outcome? Subai looked at the 2 empty thrones on the high platform in the distance. At this time, an incense appeared in front of the throne. The incense was burning. This should be a time limit. On the other side, Fatty and Buddha walked out slowly, both with a little bitter smile on their faces. In the past, broadcasting a story world, even a punitive story world, would be more or less shameless, but this time, really what's wrong is that some are done too thoroughly. Damn it, are you looking down on me, Fat Master? The broadcaster is sure that I can't defeat you Dabai alone? Do you have to recruit a Buddha to be my partner? Dabai, my task here is to burn incense with Buddha together. Kill you within the time, and then we can get any enhancement from you. Ha ha ha, you are treating me like a blood corpse. You are so thorough in using waste. The fat man laughed as he spoke, but he couldn't laugh anymore. He took out a talisman in his hand, but hesitated for a long time, looked at the incense, and then threw the talisman directly. On the ground, he stretched out his feet and stepped on them, and said a little lowly. Dabai, it's not that I'm a coward, but I really don't see any hope of winning. The fat man raised his head again, put his hands in his trouser pockets, looked at Sudbai, then at Buddha, and asked, "Shall we fight?" You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 1021. Buddha seemed calmer. He walked over and looked at the fat man carefully. Then he walked over to Sudbai and looked at Sudbai, as if he was confirming something. "I'm not a clone." Sudbai guessed what Buddha was thinking and said directly. "Me neither," Fatty replied. "But the clone may not know that it is a clone." Foy spread his hands and said, "So, in fact, we can't tell whether we are a clone. But at least we can be sure that one of us is real." Sudbai smiled and said, "It is impossible for the radio to arrange 3 clones to act in a story world. This has no meaning for it, and even the story world has also lost its original meaning." "At least one of them is true," the fat man muttered. "I think I am true, Dabai. Do you want me to kill you?" Then the fat man shrugged again. "Damn it, who cares who is true and who is false, just do whatever you have to do. After all, there is still a time limit this time. Now we can only hope that Fusu's humanoid missile will be successfully launched soon, otherwise the 3 auspicious treasures of us will really have to answer here." From beginning to end, Fatty never said that he regretted helping Sudbai. Although it was Fatty's own choice, even though Fatty had waited before making this choice, it has to be said that Fatty was more or less influenced by it when he made the choice. Sudbai's influence. The same goes for Buddha. As for the monk, in fact, the monk cannot be said to be completely influenced by Sudbai, because the monk inherited the inheritance of his previous life, Master Huiguo, which is equivalent to inheriting the beliefs of his previous life, so he has to embark on this path, regardless of Sudbai's reasons or not. The choice of a monk is actually constant. After all, Master Huiguo wanted to be a broadcaster at the beginning, but he did not have this opportunity at that time. "The incense will burn out in about an hour," Fatty added. "That means we still have an hour to play." "A day in the sky and a year on earth cannot be calculated like this." Buddha shook his head. "Maybe 1 hour in this story world can be several months in the real world. In short, if they are really successful, even if we decide the outcome in the last minute, the broadcast will stop in time. There is no such thing as success over there, and we have already separated life and death here. So, there is no need to worry." After saying that, the Buddha took off his cassock and stood shirtless, staring at Sudbai with burning eyes. Sudbai could see the majestic fighting spirit in the Buddha's eyes, as if he was a little impatient. "It seems that Lord Buddha has been eyeing me for a long time." Sudbai tilted his head slightly, with a smile on his lips, as if something was wrong with what he had just thought. The fat man started to warm up next to him, and then he bent down to pick up the talisman he had dropped just now as if he was being cool and blew the dust off it. "It's a pity that we lack a monk, otherwise we would have been able to fight Lu Buledin with 3 heroes," the fat man said regretfully. "I don't have any objections to Shuang/Fei," Sudbai said nonchalantly. The fat man was stunned for a moment, and then immediately retorted, "Damn, it's obviously me and Lord Buddha. 3,/pu. You all come together. In fact, you also know that together, you are no match for me," Sudbai said half-jokingly. If it were normal times and other listeners were in this position, it would be impossible to have such a relaxed and comfortable atmosphere in a life-and-death situation. But at the moment, these 3 people don't seem to have the self-consciousness of a life-and-death situation. "Just fight, you are going to die anyway, it doesn't matter. The one who is alive should live well for the dead," Buddha set a tone, and then magic lines began to appear on his skin, and at the same time there are also demonic flames rising up. The fat man no longer hesitated and threw out the 2 talisman papers, forming a barrier, and then began to step on Yubu, preparing to trigger thunder. There is no need to be too polite, and there is no need to be too hypocritical. The arrangement of the broadcast seems very awkward and has lost its past style, but the broadcast is still a broadcast, and the story world is a story world after all, and everyone has no choice. Choose. If you have no choice, just accept it directly. Come on then, fatty, let me see if you can lay down. Sudbai's figure disappeared on the spot and rushed directly towards the fat man. Buddha's body moved sideways and his fist swept out, but Sudbai's speed was so fast that he bypassed Buddha in an instant. Buzz. The hatchet flew out from the ground and struck Sudbai directly. Sudbai pressed down with one palm and slapped the back of the hatchet directly, knocking the hatchet away. At the same time, he still kept his figure and rushed towards the fat man. Passed. Boom. To Sudbai, Fatty's barrier was shattered instantly like paper, and had no blocking effect at all. I'm hummed, you're so numb, you have to give me a big reward if you kill me. The fat man felt very bitter. He patted his chest, and 3 flying swords flew out from behind him. On each flying sword, there was a vague Taoist shadow flashing. It seemed that Fatty had indeed learned a lot during the time when Chen Ryu threw him into the wine jar. The 3 flying swords swept forward with Sanking's will. Sudbai had to avoid the sharp edge this time, and finally let go of the pressure on the fat man. Buddha also came over again, with the hatchet in hand, chopping Huashan Mountain with all his strength. Sudbai turned sideways, raised his leg and kicked Buddha's chest. Buddha's sword hilt moved horizontally, and Sudbai kicked the sword, but the demonic flames on Buddha's body were also diverted. A ray of cyan light appeared from Sudbai's skin, cutting off the demonic flames on Buddha's body, and Sudbai raised his fist again and hit Buddha. Boom. 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 After 3 consecutive fights, Foya hit Sudbai hard with the hatchet. Sudbai's fist was not afraid of the hatchet in Foya's hand. Moreover, after repeated confrontations, Foya's momentum began to be suppressed more and more. Thunder and 5 elements, the great road has no boundaries. A thick bolt of lightning fell vertically from the air and hit Sudbai directly under the pull of Fatty's chi machine. Sudbai did not dodge this time, but opened his arms and opened his mouth. Click. The power of thunder was injected directly from Sudbai's mouth. For a moment, the entire duel arena with Sudbai as the center was filled with silver snakes dancing wildly, and then continuous explosions were heard. If the dueling arenas were not built by radio broadcasts and were indestructible items in the story world, it is estimated that even 10 dueling arenas would have been wiped out in the explosion just now. When the smoke and dust dissipated, Sudbai was still standing there. Even the clothes on his body were not damaged at all. He just gently measured his head and heard a crisp sound from his neck. The fat man next to him almost panicked, his face full of tears. Damn it, you actually swallowed the thunder I caused. This is nonsense, there is a serious imbalance in strength. This guy can now defeat even high-level listeners steadily. He is still a beginner, and Buddha is only an intermediate. 2 days of salted fish tied together is nothing more than a change. It becomes a bunch of salted fish, what's the difference? Broadcast, this is not fair. Send another helper down. I think Chen Runa is good. The fat man shouted around. Foy rubbed his wrist. In the confrontation with Sudbai just now, he knew that Sudbai had left some leeway. Otherwise, with the fighting method Sudbai had shown before, he would have fought to the death if he wanted to put it nicely, and if he had said no, he would have fought to the death. To put it nicely, it's like a mad dog that bites you without letting go until it bites you completely to death. At this thought, Buddha dropped the hatchet in his hand on the ground and said calmly, I lost. Seeing that Lord Buddha had given up treatment, the fat man stopped resisting. He simply sat down on the ground, took out a pack of cigarettes, bit one in his mouth, and threw one to Sudbai. I want it too, Buddha said. Just like that, the 3 brothers were sitting in the middle of the duel arena, each holding a cigarette. The fat man squinted his eyes, took a puff of cigarette, slowly blew it out through his mouth, inhaled it through his nose, and finally spit it out again. The old man felt completely comfortable. He shook his head, smiled, and said, "The broadcast arranged for us to kill each other and put on such a drama. We are preparing to watch a good show. By doing this, we will make the broadcast less good. This is also a disguised support for people around the world to oppose broadcasting. The great cause of communism. This is not their style." Subai raised his head and looked at the two thrones at the top of the center. "It's not their style either. Yes, in the past, even if the broadcast lost its sense of proportion, even when Dabai's parents merged with the broadcast would simply announce that it would stop broadcasting for a period of time and then do whatever it takes. It would never be dealt with casually. Even if it is a punishment story world, it is impossible to just leave the three of us in this dual field to fend for ourselves in a stick of incense. If it wants to, it actually has countless ways to make us kill each other completely instead of watching us sit here and smoke cigarettes." Buddha said. "But I can't see any hope of winning." The fat man patted his big belly. "Damn, I'm still confused." "Me too," Subai echoed. "The last time the broadcast was stopped, I was involved in that matter as a poison, but this time, I can't see clearly. Since you have been pulled into the story world, then only monks are left in the real world, and monks are probably not free either. Then, after all is said and done, no one can help Fusu. In other words, if the two broadcasters, including Suyu Yang and Lu Menjiao, could not care about others, someone with enough weight must be fighting against them. We are just sidemen waving flags and shouting, so people don't bother to deal with us now. Whether it's a trap or not, you'll know if the incense continues to burn." Buddha pointed at the incense stick. At this time, most of the incense had burned. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1022. Hundreds of luxury cars were lined up as wedding cars, and the entire hotel was booked. In order to prepare for the wedding, celebrities from all walks of life flocked in like crucian carp crossing the river. This is a wedding between the Su family and the Lu family. One is a big business family with an overseas background and the other is a well-established red family in China. Their marriage is viewed by the outside world as a powerful alliance, and it is also an opportunity for the two families to seek cooperation. Kind of alliance. But only the elders of the two families know in their hearts that the two younger generations of their families are completely free in love. In a small apartment of 60 square meters, Su Fugui was sitting upright, wearing a crisp suit. He had been an educated youth in his early years. After returning to the city, he was admitted to university. After graduation, he worked in politics for a period of time. However, at that time, people's aesthetics were generally not high, even if they had. Su Fugui, who had been an official of one parent, was obviously wearing a suit that Su Yuhang had asked a British designer to customize for him, but he forced Su Fugui to wear a Mao suit. A bottle of Mao Tai, a piece of bacon, a fish, and a bag of rice, these are gifts from Su Fugui. According to the custom in Su Fugui's hometown, newlyweds should pay attention to having fish and meat when they get married, so that they can live a prosperous life. Prosperous. Of course, for today's people, giving gold and silver treasures, even if you give a magical weapon, actually doesn't mean much. The most important thing is a thought and a heart, which Su Fugui values very much. He felt that although his friend Su Yuhang was talented in literature, he was still a young man and obviously had no experience in this area and would not be very concerned about it. Therefore, he, the older brother, had to help him take care of it. However, Su Fugui was obviously a little embarrassed here because the atmosphere was a little different from what he had imagined before. Although the big hotel in the distance was bustling, the bride and groom had just gotten up as if nothing had happened. Su Yuhang was wearing white pants and a singlet and brushing his teeth with a toothbrush in his mouth, while Lu Menjiao was wearing silk clothes. pajamas and combing hair in the room. Therefore, the real person invited to this wedding is Soo Fyugui. As long as Soo Fyugui helped Soo Yoo-hang entertain him, it would be a success, which made Soo Fyugui dumbfounded. A small apartment of 60 square meters, with 2 bedrooms and 1 living room. Soo Yoo-hang and Lee Man-jae each had a room. Soo Fyugui didn't ask much about why they didn't sleep in the same room. The audience had a huge relationship with ordinary people. Are different, the marriage and couple relationship patterns among the audiences are naturally also very different. Fyugui, I bought some vegetables yesterday and specially asked someone to bring some hot pot ingredients from Chengdu. Let's have the whole hot pot at noon. Oh, okay. Soo Fyugui nodded. Soon, the two newlyweds finished washing and changed into more formal clothes. There were no witnesses, no wedding speech, no fireworks or firecrackers. It was just such a simple 3 people gathering together to eat hot pot. Soo Yoo-hang ate the hot red oil pan with hairy tripe and goose intestines very happily. Lee Man-jae also ate with gusto. Only Soo Fyugui sighed in his heart that this wedding was really a piece of cake. When I married my daughter-in-law, I happened to be an educated youth, and there were no conditions. My daughter-in-law just carried a quilt from home and slept in her house. From that time on, I started to fight. In my heart, I feel that I owe my wife too much. Maybe there is a generation gap, maybe young people nowadays don't care much about this form. After thinking about this, Soo Fyugui sighed again. At the end of the hot pot, Soo Yoo-hang lowered the heat, cooked some dumplings and noodles, then took out a cigarette and smoked one for himself. Lee Man-jae would usually choose to leave at this time, but maybe he thought that he and Soo Yoo-hang were getting married today. So I continued to sit at the dinner table patiently. Soo Yoo-hang looked at Lee Man-jae, then pointed at her with some excitement, and said to Soo Fyugui, "My wife." Yes, Soo Fyugui responded. "She is my wife," Soo Yoo-hang said again. "I know. Ha ha ha, she is my Soo Yoo-hang's wife." Yes, Soo Fyugui looked at Soo Yoo-hang as if he was looking at a fool weighing more than 100 pounds. Of course, he was also somewhat relieved in his heart. His old friend was indeed very attracted to Lee Man-jae. Now he had indeed embraced the beauty, and it was considered that he had fulfilled his wish. Moreover, both of them had received their marriage certificates. Although the law was not clear to the audience. It seems meaningless, but some things really need this kind of procedure to add some sense of sanctity and mission to it. Daughter-in-law, Soo Yoo-hang shouted to Lee Man-jae this time. Lee Man-jae didn't respond. Daughter-in-law, Soo Yoo-hang continued to shout. Yeah, Lee Man-jae responded. Ha 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 ha. Soo Yoo-hang laughed while reaching out and patting Soo Fyugui hard on the shoulder. When are you going to have a baby? Soo Fyugui asked. I'm going to find someone to be a surrogate mother, Soo Yoo-hang replied directly. It's about time. Soo Fyugui was stunned for a moment and said with some surprise, then I really want to be a godfather. There is no way. In our situation, it is almost impossible to get Man-jae pregnant and give birth to a child. We can only find a surrogate mother. Soo Yoo-hang said helplessly. It seemed that he really wanted Lee Man-jae to get pregnant for him. This was a sense of accomplishment for a man. To put it more chauvinistically, he wanted the woman he loved to conceive and reproduce for him. Descendants are considered a kind of honor and life satisfaction. It's the same, after all, the bloodline is still yours, Soo Fyugui comforted. Yes, Soo Yoo-hang turned over the topic, looked at Fyugui, and asked, Fyugui, are you about to become enlightened? It's still early, Soo Fyugui shook his head, not ready yet. What about you? I'm almost done. I've finished all these things recently. When my child is born, I will go and preach. Soo Yoo-hang smiled. The feeling of suppressing strength is indeed not very comfortable. It's like standing on a plateau and having difficulty breathing. A feeling of... Yes, Soo Fyugui agreed. Actually, I am more curious about the senior guardian of the place of enlightenment. It is said that he has been lying there for almost 3 years. It's been 3 years. When the next train arrives, it's time for him to leave, Su Yuhang said. I just don't know who the next guardian will be. It is said that there is an underworld there, and there are a lot of tombstones under the underworld. They are all the insights left by the great masters who have achieved enlightenment in the past. Some people choose to bury their weaknesses, and some choose to bury their weaknesses. Bury your own pride, but more importantly, bury your own feelings, Su Fuegui said. This can only be regarded as a little sentiment that broadcasters like to play. After all, what you bury is not what you give up. Only the weak will choose to bury their own weaknesses to give themselves a false sense of perfection. Su Yuhang blew out a smoke ring and said, "It's almost here, it's almost here." After finishing the hot pot, Lu Menjiao stood up to clean up the dishes. Su Fuegui was a little surprised, because this was the first time he saw Lu Menjiao take the initiative to do housework. Usually when everyone had a chance to have dinner together, Su Yuhang would take care of the dishes himself. Su Yuhang was obviously very satisfied with this and smiled like a fool. His wife was cleaning up, so Su Yuhang and Su Fuegui simply went out for a walk. When you get married, just cherish this kind of life, Su Fuegui sighed as he walked away. I envy you very much. You are all the audience anyway, so it doesn't matter. On the other hand, I have a home that I can't go back to, and a wife who can't accompany me. Look away, Su Yuhang said. You have to look away, Su Fuegui sighed. By the way, from what you just said, the child is already being conceived. Well, I found a surrogate and gave her some money, Su Yuhang nodded. Are you ready to get one? I plan to have two, Su Yuhang spread his palms. For such an outstanding person like me, leaving only one descendant would be a crime against the future of mankind. At least two should be left behind. Haha, that's right, Su Fuegui nodded. His friend was indeed not bragging. Even if he was not an audience member, Su Yuhang was still a very smart person. Of course, among the audience, he was also a very smart person, even letting Su Wealthy himself feels a little ashamed of himself. What do you want your children to do in the future? Painters? Scientists? Su Fuegui asked. He liked this topic better. Firstly, he was happy for his friends, and secondly, he wanted to heal the regret of not being able to accompany his children. Let them do whatever they want, as long as they don't lend me a loan shark, they can do whatever they want. Su Yuhang was open-minded. Even if you become an audience, it's not bad. At least you can see the scenery that ordinary people can't glimpse in their lifetime, and be a part of it, the feeling of being a god. Su Fuegui was a little surprised, but Su Yuhang was his father, so he had no reason to interrupt, so he could only continue walking forward in silence. At this time, Su Yuhang suddenly asked, Fuegui, can you see the future? I have never asked you seriously, have you tried to see my future? Su Yuhang suddenly asked seriously. Su Fuegui stopped and shook his head. You are my friend. To me, the closer the person is, the less I can see through him. It's okay to keep it a bit mysterious. Su Yuhang nodded, as if he was not surprised by Su Fuegui's answer. If you see through it, it won't be interesting, Su Fuegui continued. Whether it's between friends or relatives, if you see through it completely, you won't be able to be friends or even relatives. This is very profound. Su Yuhang took out the lighter and turned it around between his fingers. Fuegui, as my child's godfather, please give my child a name. Just call it White. Subai, Su Yuhang pondered for a moment. Do you want his life to be as pure as a blank sheet of paper? Yes, Su Fuegui nodded. The two of them stopped talking and continued walking. Su Yuhang didn't ask Fuegui why he only gave himself one name when he said he wanted two children. Fuegui didn't say that White has another meaning. Call. Wasted effort. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disiao Long. Chapter 1023. The slightly drunken wind blows from the high lake, bringing refreshing freshness. Su Fuegui enjoyed this moment very much. He always thought that maybe it was because he was older, and he also felt that maybe he didn't have the ambition. In short, he was very greedy for everything in this world, as if he had just returned to the city to take the exam. When I was in college, I always liked to sit in the flower garden of the university for most of the day. However, the college students in the few years after the college entrance examination were just resumed were older, so there was nothing to be embarrassed about. On the contrary, I could occasionally meet them. I met a few like-minded friends, sitting together by the flower garden, not chatting or talking, and occasionally passing a few low-quality cigarettes to each other. Standing on the high tower, looking at the beautiful scenery in the distance, and holding a cup of Maotai in his hand, Su Fuegui felt that he was very comfortable now, at least much better than when he was an educated youth and couldn't eat enough. Drinking alone. An old monk wearing cassocks walked up slowly. There are no monks in Chongsheng Temple. Although the country is funding its renovation recently, it is still a little deserted. Perhaps, in 20 years this place will become a famous tourist attraction. Well, let's drink alone, Su Fuegui responded. Master, would you like to have a drink too? But, a poor monk is not willing to break the precepts. But as soon as he finished speaking, the master's body suddenly trembled and became a little blurry. Then, a young figure came out of his body. This man took the wine glass handed over by Su Fuegui, took a sip of wine, and made a crisp sound with his mouth. The wine is good, did you bring it yourself? Su Fuegui has long been used to this. This eminent monk from Yunnan is relatively familiar with him. This guy integrated Buddhism into strengthening and forcibly cultivated his three-generation self, old, middle and young, and it can be switched at any time, and according to him, when he first became enlightened, he was buried with his middle-aged self. Although Gendao's burial with a tombstone was just a formality, the master's middle-aged self has not manifested since then. According to the master himself, the old self is the current self. The young self has not yet become a monk. It can be used to drink, eat, and enjoy life without being affected by the rules and regulations. So, what is the middle-aged self? If there is no use for it, it is better to throw it away. The simplest meaning of becoming a monk is to leave home and throw away all the burdens that can be thrown away. Your friend should be out soon. After the master drank the wine, he returned to the appearance of an old monk, with wrinkles and ravines on his face, full of vicissitudes of life. Well, soon Su Fuegui guessed. Su Yuhang went to the place where he attained enlightenment to attain enlightenment. This was just a formality. When are you going to attain enlightenment? The master asked again. Soon. He. The two were silent for a while, and the master took the initiative to break the silence. You can see things that I can't see, and touch causes and effects that I dare not touch, so I can't give you much advice, but I always feel that your friend is a bit strange. The master seemed to be hesitating whether to talk about this topic, because he could see that Fuegui had an extraordinary relationship with the young man named Su Yuhang. This relationship can be called friendship, and the term friendship planting something is definitely a luxury that cannot be more luxurious among listeners. Tell me more specifically. Su Fuegui is still the same honest person. He has always been like this. He doesn't talk much and likes to agree. So when he is with Su Yuhang often talks about it. He agrees. What does Su Yuhang do? He was there to help, like a shy big brother. He has a talent that shocks me, the master said seriously, seemingly with a little emotion, but the speed at which his strength improves is not that exaggerated. So what? So, he has a big heart. Literati always pay attention to having the world in mind, Su Fuegui said disapprovingly. Haha, maybe, but the poor monk has lived for almost 100 years and has seen many things. I can't see through that one, and I don't dare to look at it. Okay, master, you are over 90 years old and you are an audience member and you can still reach enlightenment step by step. You don't dare to look at him, and I don't dare to look at you. You the master shook his head and said nothing, but he could see that Sufyugui was not afraid to look, but was rarely confused. Ahead, a young man walked from the Urhai lake. He walked very slowly, but his figure kept flickering back and forth, as if he had moved several kilometers in a blink of an eye. From the shore of Urhai Lake to Chongsheng Temple, he seemed to have only walked a few steps. Then the next moment, he appeared at the top of the tower, standing behind Sufyugui and the master. The clothes are fluttering and unrestrained. 20 years later, Hanfu has gradually become popular in many circles. However, for adult men, if you wear Hanfu without a beard, you will easily look like a eunuch. But this kind of thing does not exist with this person. His temperament fits so well with these clothes. Amitba, even though he had just spoken ill of the other party, the master still saluted Su Yuhang with his hands clasped together. He has lived for almost 100 years. Even if he is not an audience, he has always maintained absolute sobriety at such an old age. It was enough for him to become a master through cultivation. How do you feel? Sufyugui asked. Fortunately, I just felt someone was looking at me when I was enlightened, Su Yuhang said with a smile. Moreover, I feel that the person looking at me is not now, but in the future. It seems that you have learned my skills, Sufyugui chuckled, still so honest. I raised it casually. No matter who he is, I can always teach him a lesson. Su Yuhang turned around, looked at the master, and said, Master, the Shura field where you said you were found, now you go. But wealth has not yet been enlightened, the master said. I'm not in a hurry, Sufyugui said, but the place you discovered was an ancient battlefield that was isolated by the Qin army's warlocks. Since it is already on the verge of collapse, we'd better go in and take a look as soon as possible. Let's see, so as not to leave any regrets. Things that should collapse will collapse sooner or later, and we are not in a hurry at this time. In addition, the isolated ancient battlefield has been riddled with holes for 2,000 years. I don't know how much debris has been absorbed. Now it may be there's nothing to see in the garbage dump. Go and have a look. Su Yuhang seemed impatient. It is said to be the birthplace of hell. Yes, maybe a long time ago, someone entered there by mistake and saw that horrific scene. After returning and narrating it to others, the legend of hell slowly evolved, and then the hells of the 10 directions and King Yama appeared. According to the story, even now, people occasionally enter that place by mistake. Some people enter and fail to come out. Some people are confused when they come out, and they keep shouting words about hell and the devil. Therefore, some myths and legends are not completely groundless. Of course, thousands of years of oral transmission will definitely require a lot of artistic processing, but this so-called hell does exist. It's just that it's not the place where yin and yang reincarnate, and the soul of a person doesn't go there after death. It's just a forgotten space. A Qin army fought here 2,000 years ago, and it was so abandoned that it has become a junk now. Seeing that Sufyugui and Su Yuhang were so insistent, the master no longer shied away, and nodded immediately, let the poor monk prepare first. It is not easy for the body to enter that place, especially since 2 of the 3 of us have already attained enlightenment. Entering there in the physical body can easily crush that place directly, so we can only sneak in there as souls. Su Yuhang and Sufyugui nodded when they heard this. What do you want to eat tonight? The master asked. I'll have someone prepare it. Let's set off at midnight. Whatever. Su Yuhang didn't take it seriously. He wasn't very interested in eating except what he cooked himself. I want to eat some meat and some wine, Sufyugui stated his request. The master heard this and walked down the tower with a smile. Your child, counting the time, will be born soon, Sufyugui asked Su Yuhang after the master left. Well, it's almost time. When this hell is over, I will wait for the child to be born. Suyu Hang took out a cigarette and bit it in his mouth. It can be seen that his interest was not high, even just now the enlightenment was successful, but there was no trace of high-spiritedness in him. Why aren't you happy when you become a big boss? Su Fuegui asked. No matter how big the boss is, compared to other listeners, in the eyes of the broadcaster, he is just a bigger ant. Suyu Hang chewed tobacco in his mouth. No matter how big the boss is after his enlightenment, he is still bigger than the broadcaster. Yes, Su Fuegui agreed. The two of them stood here and blew the wind for a while before walking down the pagoda. It happened that the master was still down there, seeming to be talking to the construction team about some details. This renovation was actually a kind of cultural relic protection work. Naturally, you have to be more careful. After all, you are not building a building. Someone in the construction team was taking photos and archiving them with a camera that was relatively new at the time. Su Fuegui became interested and waved to the young man, leaned over and whispered a few words to him, then stuffed a pack of cigarettes over. Young and sensible, he nodded. Come on, take a picture, just treat it as a trip. Su Fuegui pulled Suyu Hang and stood together with the master. Suyu Hang was a little speechless, and the master also smiled a little. But neither of them wanted to dampen Su Fuegui's interest, so they stood side by side with him. The young man took the camera and adjusted the focus. He shouted, "Come on, smile, it's done." Crack. A photo. In the middle is the young Suyu Hang, on the left is the fat old Fuegui, and on the right is the old master. Behind the three people, it is the towering three pagodas of Chongsheng Temple. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1024. Chongsheng Temple was being renovated, so the three of them moved to another small temple first. The master was highly respected, so he still had some respect. He dispersed the few monks who were here, and the master personally arranged a magic circle for protection. The three bodies were revealed, and then the three of them sat cross-legged together. Amitabha, follow this poor monk. After finishing speaking, the master closed his eyes, and a wisp of green smoke rose from his brow. His soul turned into steam, and the invisible was better than the tangible. This was an extremely high state, and it was also a state of fearlessness and inaction. Suyu Hang's soul came out of his body and waited for Fuegui for a while. Then the two souls followed the master's green smoke and walked towards the crack in front. Buzz. When passing through the crack, there was a great pulling force from all around. Because Fuegui had not yet attained enlightenment, the master and Suyu Hang were blessing Fuegui on the left and right. After a quarter of an hour, the souls of the three people passed through the crack safely. Immediately, the souls of the three people transformed into their own bodies. Above the head, there is a mysterious arrangement of stars, and under the feet, there is the layout of the hells in the 10 directions. Perhaps, the warlocks of the Great Qin who arranged this battlefield 2,000 years ago would not have thought that one of their actions at that time would lead to the knowledge of hell in later generations. Various legends, even from a fantasy perspective, far surpass the Great Qin Empire of the past. Su Fuegui bent down and felt the ground with his soul. This was a ground with emotions, because it had been soaked in countless blood, and a shocking killing had occurred here. Fuegui didn't know what the final outcome would be, whether the Qin army was completely annihilated here, or whether they succeeded in annihilating a group of audience members who came. But no matter what the ending here is, nothing that happens here will actually have any impact on the final ending. In other words, the story here can be summarized as I have been here, I have fought, and I have sacrificed. The master clasped his hands together and recited the Heart Sutra silently. He was performing a salvation, but it was obvious that this salvation had little effect, because there were no substantial dead souls here, and the residual thoughts left behind had experienced 2,000 years. It doesn't mean that you will be able to transform after tempering. Su Yuhang's eyes wandered here. In fact, he should be the most literary among the three people, but in fact, it seems that such things as literary youth only appear to those who like to show off. At a time when the rich and the great masters are nostalgic for the past and present, Su Yuhang appears more calm, that is, more practical. He was searching, he was observing, whether there would be anything he needed in this ancient battlefield, which would later be called hell. A few moments after Master's salvation was over, Su Fuegui also slowly straightened up. The three of them walked side by side through this ancient battlefield. There are not many corpses, because this ancient battlefield is not completely isolated, so I don't know how many miscellaneous things have been sucked in over the past 2,000 years, and I don't know how many things that were originally here have flowed out, but every distance can still be. I saw some severed finger remains and broken weapons. We should have won the battle here, the master analyzed, so the Qin army cleaned up his body after the victory. Su Fuegui nodded. That should be the case, because according to the traces left here, at least a dozen boss-level listeners from both sides of this battle fought here. In fact, the number may be more, and the Qin army sometimes did they compete with each other for casualties based on military formation and numbers. Therefore, if the battle here is defeated, there will definitely be a lot of corpses left by the Qin army. Even if a lot of them have been scattered in 2,000 years, it is not surprising to see the small number of remains of weapons here. The Qin army should have won the battle here. But a partial victory cannot change the outcome of the entire situation. After all, the three people present know that big-name audiences may seem precious, but for radio, they are nothing more than products manufactured batch by batch on the assembly line. Leaving aside the battlefield relics, there are actually more messy things here, which may have been sucked in by the cracks by chance. There are Greek-like sculptures and Oriental ornaments. But there really aren't many valuable things here. Su Yuhang felt a little disappointed, as if he had arrived in a hurry and returned disappointed. The master and Su Fuegui came here with the mentality of outing, which is similar to visiting a history museum, so it is not very utilitarian. The two of them walked around, looked at, and touched, and they felt it was a kind of enjoyment. Suddenly, Su Yuhang stopped and pointed at his feet. There is something down there, it should be a coffin. Is there a coffin? Su Fuegui came over with interest. To be honest, although there are many kinds of things in hell, there have never been any real high-quality products. The three of them still hope to gain something else. Su Yuhang's soul power was released, and a piece of dust and rock below floated away, revealing the surface of the sarcophagus. The master knelt down to identify it carefully, then shook his head. It's another imported product. It seems to be from Central Asia. Judging from the patterns, colors, and carvings, it should be from the ancient western regions. This means that this coffin is not something left over from the battlefield of the Qin dynasty, but was absorbed from somewhere. Su Yuhang was a little disappointed when he heard this, but he still used his soul power to lift the lid of the sarcophagus. No matter what, he had to open it and take a look. The sarcophagus was opened, revealing the true face inside. A pretty-looking woman was lying here silently. Her appearance is well preserved, but in fact she has existed for at least 1,000 years, and her value definitely surpasses that of the so-called Lulan ancient corpse. But Su Yuhang and the others are not here for archaeology, so to them, it is of little value. Well, an ancient corpse, haha. After saying that, the master smiled again. It is an ancient corpse that has been cursed by someone. It is interesting and interesting. This female corpse has become stiff, but in this place, although there is no direct restriction by the laws of heaven and earth, but the residual murderous thoughts on this ancient battlefield are too strong, and she dare not wake up. Now that there are three of us here, She is even more afraid to wake up. Haha, she is pretending to sleep. The master laughed freely. Immediately, the master pretended to be compassionate and said, Amitabha, this coffin is not old enough. Su Fuegui nodded from the side. Hey, this woman still has something in her stomach. It's a pity. The year is really not enough. If we hadn't met in this place, we would have made a midnight snack if we met under normal circumstances. That is the origin of the curse. It was implanted by the person who gave her the curse. It is usually a seed or a small insect. The method is very similar to Miao Jiang's cultivation of gu. But what do you think of Fuegui? You're right, if this thing is old enough and used to make wine, it will indeed taste good, but unfortunately, the age is still a little different, so it would be a pity to use it to make wine. At this moment, Su Yuhang's expression suddenly changed and he said, Silence, soon. Su Yuhang sighed again, forget it, it's too late. After saying that, Su Yuhang waved his hand, and the coffin lid flipped back again to cover the coffin again. Su Yuhang's face also looked a little ugly. What's wrong? The master was a little confused. Let's go and have a look elsewhere, Su Yuhang said as he walked to the other side. He did not explain his behavior just now. Let's search separately. It would be too troublesome for the three of us to search together, Su Fuegui suggested. The master and Su Yuhang both nodded, and then the three of them separated. About 10 minutes later, Su Fuegui's figure came back here again. He looked a little clumsy in his tiptoeing, but also a little cute, like a simple and honest uncle next door. Of course, what Su Fuegui didn't know was that he was 20 years later, this image was uniformly called Laoang next door. Su Fuegui looked at the other side. In fact, his figure was still wandering there, but Su Yuhang and the master had gone far away. He touched his chin worriedly. The trick I learned from the master should be useful, right? Forget it, I don't care about my original self and my true self. Anyway, Su Yuhang is also a soul body in this ghost place, and he has the huge remnant suppression here, so he should also. I can't tell which one is my true self and which one is my true self. No matter, let's take a look at how my godson is doing. It's really weird, little guy, godfather, I didn't expect that I could meet you in this damn place even though you haven't been born yet. You won't be unlucky enough to become a listener in the future, right? Well, that's right, your parents are both listeners. Unless they left you in an orphanage to fend for yourself since you were a child, the probability of you becoming a listener without being affected by cause and effect is really low. Su Fuegui continued to mutter to himself while carefully preparing to lift the coffin. It seems that this ancient battlefield enchantment is not that simple. The warlocks of the Qin dynasty did have two brushes. This enchantment should be infinitely close to the story world created by the broadcast. It can actually change the relationship between here and the main world outside. Time flows. With that said, Su Fuegui opened the coffin lid carefully without making any sound, squatted down, put his head above and stared at the female corpse in the coffin carefully again. SHH, your dad is gone. Su Fuegui put his index finger to his lips and made a silence gesture. In his eyes, there was another soul inside the female corpse at this time, or it was almost like another gaze. He thought it should be a baby, because it was too difficult for Fuegui to imagine what Subai would look like 20 years later. Fuegui felt really happy when he thought that he had met his godson so early in advance before he was born. Shush, your dad is gone, shush shush shush, little ancestor, pee quickly. Su Fuegui kept shushing softly in his mouth, imagining that he was coaxing his godson to urinate for him. He himself enjoys it. Can't help myself. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1025. Boom. 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 Continuous explosions echoed continuously, and Fusu began to show his fatigue when faced with the siege of three high-level people. Subai, Foya and Fatty were still smoking cigarettes and watching the sandalwood burning slowly in the story world of the broadcast. The monk was attacked by two high-ranking men at a highway service station. They could not escape and had to talking about boring life. Chen Ryu stood alone at the door of the small temple and did not take any action. Therefore, the current situation is almost as bad as possible for Fusu. Fusu had never been so impatient when faced with the kind of siege in Shijiazhuang before. Subai and the monk arrived in time and Subai's great power pulled him out, but now he hurried back without stopping. Here, they were surrounded again. This time, it seemed that no one could help him. But this time, I was only a few kilometers away from my destination. The accomplishment of the mission is just around the corner. For the listeners, apart from people like Subai and Monk who have to choose sides, it is extremely difficult for the rest of the listeners to be able to watch the changes from the other side. If you ask them to blatantly resist the broadcast, I'm sorry, they can't do it. Even Chen Ryu is still standing in the distance like an ice sculpture, watching the excitement, with no intention of taking action. Radio's listener destruction plan is no longer a secret, but the possibility that the train will reappear in the end has become almost everyone's last desire and hope. Yes, as long as people have hope, it is difficult to choose to burn everything. Just as the monk said to the two high-level listeners, everyone regards themselves as the protagonist and thinks that they will be the lucky one. In fact, it is natural to become a high-level listener or even an intermediate or even high-level listener. Strong people, who have come out of countless life and death catastrophes, it is too difficult for them not to have confidence in themselves and not to think that they are the protagonist. Moreover, the shadow and pressure of broadcasting have always existed for everyone. Unless it really blocks all the light, those who dare to shout "Would you rather be a broadcast host?" are also a minority among the very few, even the bloody corpses of the past, and it was also because his wife died in front of him in that way that he embarked on this path. Really, there is no hope. Chen Ryu shook her head slightly. In fact, if she could see even a little bit of other hope, she might consider and hesitate. But right now, Fusu is being besieged by 3 high-level listeners in Sichuan. Even if she takes action, she may not be able to do anything. If you don't have time to do anything, you'll be pulled into the story world, which doesn't help at all. Chen Ryu was thinking that the moment he took action, he would at most severely injure one high-level audience member and be dragged away. He wouldn't even be able to kill him in time, so the problem of the remaining 2 holding Fusu away wouldn't be a big deal. Time passed slowly, and Chen Ryu could clearly see Fusu slowly getting up. Sighing, Chen Ryu still didn't move. Perhaps, this is the ending. Even when it is at its weakest, it is still the most massive and unshakable existence to the audience. What's more, that man named Su Yuhang. At this thought, Chen Ryu bit her lip. As strong as she was, she rarely showed such hesitation and hesitation. This was not her style, nor her style of painting. Fusu's soul and body were constantly traumatized. He was not Subai. He did not have a physique that could be called abnormal. Even this body was healed. Therefore, facing the siege of 3 high-level people, he was very vulnerable. It's hard to hold on for too long. Are you still unwilling to take action? Fusu seemed to be talking to himself, but in fact he was speaking to the original owner of this body. If there was Ji Zhen's help, the 2 of them would at least have a chance to fight like they did in Shijiazhuang before. However, from the time he reoccupied his body until now, Ji Zhen has been in a silent state. But this time, Xie Zhen responded. You want to avenge your country, he wants to avenge his parents. But me? Just want to live well. Xie Zhen's answer was very concise and straightforward. Boss Liang did not hesitate to offend the broadcaster and Su Yuhang, and was finally pulled into the story world and sealed in order to save himself, and the purpose was also to keep himself alive. Therefore, Xie Zhen didn't want to die. He couldn't tell whether it was because he was afraid of death and this so-called sacrifice, or because he didn't want to live up to his boss's heart and dedication to him. Or a little bit of both. Would you rather be a dog waiting to be slaughtered than dare to open your mouth and bite someone? Fusu smiled, stretched out his hand to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth, and his body shook. At this time, a blue barrier appeared in front of him, which could block the attack of the wave of people outside, but it was obvious that this barrier could not last long. Why should I dedicate myself to you? Xie Zhen sneered, especially when you don't ask for my opinion at all. I want to live, and my boss also wants me to live. It's you, the so-called big man like you. The young master broke the agreement with my boss. He. Fusu continued to smile. Next moment, the barrier is broken. 3 high-level experts rushed over directly. There were exactly 3 of them here. As long as they killed Fusu, they could directly obtain 3 immigration qualifications. I ask you, how long do you have to wait? Have you forgotten the character of the old Qin people? Fusu suddenly shouted. Buzz. 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 Chen Ru's eyes focused for a moment. The Qin general's armor that had been silent in the small temple actually began to tremble at this moment. The sleeping and weak armored man seemed to start to burn his soul at this time, echoing the call from His Highness the Grand Master of the Qin dynasty. Call. This time, it is burning, this time, it is sacrifice, this time, it is a complete all-out effort. After this time, the consciousness of the armored man will be completely wiped out, just like the brilliant fireworks, which will disappear after an instant of youth. Without a trace. Is this a backup move? Chen Ru frowned slightly. Next moment, General Qin's armor directly broke through the seal that Fatty had imposed before, soaring into the sky, bringing with it majestic pressure. His tyrannical and violent aura swept around like a hurricane, bringing with it a shocking murderous intent. He came from a sea of blood where tens of thousands of robes killed each other. He was sealed and punished by the first emperor because he refused to sleep. Now, he reappeared and reasserted his will with a decisive gesture. Even though he contradicted the first emperor in the past, the first emperor still did not kill him, but chose to seal him. The armored man did not really betray Great Qin, he was just dissatisfied with that ending. What he wanted more at that time was to die happily in battle instead of falling into an inexplicable sleep. Now, at this time, he completely burned himself and responded to the call from His Highness the eldest young master. Is this a backup move? Chen Ru raised her head and watched the suit of armor fly up. In the distance, 3 high-level powerhouses who were besieging Fusu felt a terrible force coming from them. They all postponed their offensive. The pressure on the armor was so overwhelming that they had to pay attention to it. Fusu's figure swayed slightly, with a look of anger on his face, because at this moment, Xie Zhen, who had been docile and unresisting before, actually started to resist. Wait a little longer, and your name will be immortal, Fusu said with a sinister voice. Your boss will hang a portrait of you in front of his bed in the future, and sleep with your relics every night. Isn't that right? Isn't it better? Fusu's teeth were full of blood, and he no longer had the royal demeanor when he spoke. He hates. He is tired. Now, finally relief is at hand. I want to live. I don't want to die for others. Ji Zhen's roar came from within his body, and he began to seize power crazily. He wanted to force Fusu out of his body. He knew that if he didn't resist at this time, he would really have no chance. Everyone has their own position. Everyone also has the opportunity to choose. Finally, at this moment, Xie Zhen made his choice. Just as Subai got out of the car early and the monk and Fusu simultaneously suppressed his Xie Zhen, naturally his Xie Zhen could also resist at this time. After all, no one owes anyone anything. Fusu's spirit body had long been injured after the previous fierce battle, and now he seemed a little helpless when facing Xie Zhen's crazy counterattack. Fortunately, armor has appeared. Put it on. Your mission will be completed. Father, sons and ministers. Coming soon. Jeju, Lao Qin, fight against the national calamity together. Until the blood is shed, we will die, without a truce. Darkness, De Qin, have not finished this battle yet. The armor is coming with force, mixed with surging anger. The pride of the old Qin people has long been immersed in their bones and blood. Now that His Highness, the eldest son, has been forced to this point by these dark lackeys, how can the armor man not be angry? Knowing that Fusu was already running out of strength, the three high-level listeners from Kawachi stopped their offensive and prepared to face the terrifying blow from the armored man. Immigration qualifications are extremely valuable, but if you die at this point, you will lose everything. They are not stupid, they know clearly what is important and what is important. However, at this moment, a beautiful shadow rises into the sky. A bare hand held down the armor. Like a butterfly stopping in front of a charging mad cow. Picture. Very incongruous. Buzz. The terrifying sound of concussion resounded in all directions, and the menacing armor was intercepted in mid-air by the woman. She could no longer move. Everything seemed to have stopped at this moment. Fusu swayed and half knelt down. He raised his head and looked at the scene in the sky, his eyes almost splitting. Then, 2 lines of blood and tears flowed out of his pupils. It's over. It's all over. It's over. It's all over. Also. Lost. This woman. From the very beginning, she. They are on the opposite side.